Good evening and welcome back to Tough Talking Thursday. My name is Joel Nanton and I'm your host every Thursday right here on Channel 4. We go wherever the business trail leads us, and tonight we're looking at the Moody downgrade, and of course that ties into the slipping oil price, or the oil price that has dropped big time since June the 14th, I believe, last year. With us on set is none other than Senator Larry Howard, our finance minister, and with him is Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, a senior economist, former banker, as you know. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank
Tonight,
you. And good evening to all your viewers. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Tonight promises to be a very interesting discussion as we look at these recent developments. And we want to dive right in and talk to the minister at first and get him to tell us how hot the seat he's sitting in really is. Everybody is weighing in on this downgrade announced by Moody International. We have heard from the chambers, we heard even from people on the street. From where you sit, are we in big trouble? Are we making a mountain out of a molehill? Or are we somewhere in between?
Yeah, well, I want to say, first of all, that, I have said on a number of occasions that I thought the rating itself was unfair. Mm-hmm. But I want to say that the thing is that Moody's did identify issues that need to be addressed. And some of them are issues that have been on the agenda for some time, even preceding this government and over the years of which this government has been in office. And it's certainly, I recognize the fact that we need to accelerate some of the work that we do in order to address the deficiencies that become a little bit more stark when the price of oil is $50 as opposed to when it's $150. Right. And therefore, it requires us to put an acceleration on some of these issues. And to be fair to the government, I think that a lot of work has gone on, and certainly there's a recognition of the need to accelerate that work. And in the meantime, of course, as you say, the seat is very hot because you have to deal with a number of issues, not least of which is requiring us to close the gap between where our fiscal position would have been had prices remained where they were in around a year ago, as compared to where they are today. And, I think for the first half we've done reasonably well. But I've said to everyone that, and at all the interviews that I've done, that the last half, the next 6 months, will probably be a little bit more challenging than the first 6 months. And, I'm not, we're not lulled into a false sense of security that we were able to balance and show a small surplus for the first half of the year. We recognize the need to accelerate those efforts going into this half.
For the sake of our viewers, really, and I want to tell viewers that you're welcome to join the conversation right away. We have opened up the lines. You can call us at 675-8747 or 675-8749. Of course, we're also streaming live on our Facebook page and on GISL TV /TV/TV-4. Could you, Minister, kind of explain to us what does a rating, like by the big three, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, what does a rating like that really mean for the average citizen and the country in general?
Well, I think, once the rating itself gives an indication of how strong, robust, and sustainable your economy is from the point of view of the analysts out there. And, of course, the implications are that if, for example, you wanted to borrow money on the international market, to the extent that you have a good credit rating, more people are willing to lend you. Price of borrowing tends to be lower, and these feed through into your overall fiscal position. And those are things that, therefore, affect the amount of money you have left to deal with providing the goods and services that we need to provide to the country as a whole. So it does have that, and it does it does measure to some extent the level of confidence that one could have in lending to a country. And from that point of view, it can impact on, as I said, the goods and services that we offer to our citizens.
Right. We have a caller right away from Cocorit. Caller, welcome to the program.
Yeah, good afternoon. Mr. Awai, there's a school of thought on the ground. People are saying that all your data with respect to the budget and budgetary comments that you're making and with respect to the economy, there's a serious question mark to them because they are suggesting, and as a suggestion that I concur with, that the Central Statistical Office, when we say you, I mean your government, has deliberately emasculated that office so that you can engage in data that is not correct and give a false impression of the economy to the country. Why it is, and this is a direct question to you now, why it is that the Central Statistical Office, the CEO, which we depend on for data, and that the IMF have questioned you about it, and you have never given an answer that is above board and is acceptable to the community. I'll listen to you, Ophir.
This is Tough Talking Thursday.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for highlighting the issue of the CSO, which is one of the issues that the rating agency had mentioned, and as you had quite rightly indicated, the IMF had also mentioned that particular issue.
Yes.
The thing is that the CSO has had problems going back for more than a decade, and I think it's gradually gotten a little bit worse until I would say about a year ago when it started to improve. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why we raised an issue with Moody in terms of their overall evaluation, because in the last year we've added a further 19 statisticians to the CSO. We have identified new offices and premises where we can house the CSO properly. And we have been able to help them bring a lot of their statistics on GDP, on international trade, for example, and on unemployment more up to date. GDP data, we've rebased 12 and 13. We're in the process of completing 14. And for example, in the case of the unemployment data, we've brought it up to the end of 2014. We're just about close to the end of 2014. We're just about 1 quarter behind in terms of where we need to be, so that we're pretty up to date on the unemployment data. So we have made some strides in the past year in attempting to fix this problem. We recognize the difficulty and the credibility issues that arise, and certainly we ourselves would be unable to forecast properly and do proper macroeconomic planning if you don't have data.
Yes. Let me just give way to a caller who has been waiting from Westmoreland. Caller, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to pose one question to the Minister. With respect to the downgraded Moody rating of Trinidad and Tobago, how is that going to impact on the economy? How, if at all, in a tangible way? And if so, how does the government of Trinidad and Tobago intend to address it, to remedy that?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's a confidence statistic to a large extent. It does affect you if you need to borrow money on the international markets, for example. We, however, have no plans at this stage to borrow funds and to borrow any money on the international market outside of some of the government-to-government arrangements that exist with the Chinese, where we have to, where we've entered into some agreements with them which haven't been actually started. And therefore, if they were on a normal commercial basis, you would potentially have had an increase in interest rates.
Absolutely.
But outside of that, I mean, it does affect the price at which our bonds trade on the international market, but it isn't an immediate effect on us. As I've said, our overall macroeconomic situation has not changed dramatically between last year and this year. We've not really gone into our Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Our foreign exchange reserves remain strong. Our foreign exchange inflows will be affected by the fact that the price of oil has fallen, but that isn't related to the rating per se. It's related to the price of oil.
I have another caller waiting. I want to bring Dr. Ramkasoon in as well and pick up on something the Minister is saying. But first, Marval, welcome to the program. Marval, are you still there?
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Honorable Minister, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Panel, good afternoon.
Good evening.
One simple question as a young person working in the financial sector. Does your administration accept responsibility for Moody's downgrade, which is, I guess, similarly tied to the first question?
Yeah.
Just before you answer, let me bring St. Madeline in right away, and then we'll try and see if we can answer both. St. Madeline, welcome.
Hi, good night.
Good night.
I want the minister to explain this Moody's thing. They said Petrotrin is one of the reasons why they downgrade us, right? And so Rosie and them always protesting. And that was the reason why the company is suffering losses. My husband working for a shipping company, and sometimes he does be out there late in the night waiting for ships to come in. And the delay is because workers taking action, and that has caused Petrotrin to pay high fees to foreign clients. Every night he's out there late. I want to know why the government don't privatize Petrotrin and why, the government still own that oil company.
Thank you. So we have a call.
Two
questions.
questions. In terms of the first question, as I said, the economy still remains strong. There are issues that need to be addressed, which have been on the agenda for quite some time. The issue of diversification of the economy is something that we've spoken about for 40 years or so, at least. And certainly every government has a responsibility to do things to accelerate that. And it is something that, we've started that process. And there are a number of plans in place, but there are investments that need to be made to realize some of those plans.
Right.
And they relate to things like the health sector, for example, and what we want to do in the health sector, the financial services sector, and so on. And we started to see some movement in those various sectors. The thing is that it's our responsibility, and whichever government is in power has the responsibility to do whatever it can to address the issue of what your rating is likely to be and how best you could improve it. Of course, one of the things we have to remember too is that the government's responsibility is to balance the requirements. In other words, we could take all the money and put it in their bank account, and you have a big bank account, but you have no services available to your citizens. Now, Moody's may then say, well, fine, you have a great bank account, a lot of financial buffers. We think you should be rated E. Right. But on the other hand, there are no services. So what? One of the things the Prime Minister has been very clear about in terms of policy and the underlying philosophy of the government is that focus must be paid on ensuring a balance between ensuring that you have a strong economy and you have a good credit rating, while at the same time ensuring that you produce the goods and services that people need and that provides a basis for the growth and diversification of the economy. With respect to the second issue of Petrotrin, certainly there are challenges that Petrotrin faces. I'm not quite sure that we could deal with all of those and how we deal with them going forward. The question has been asked about why do we need to own Petrotrin, and certainly some of those issues are issues that need to be evaluated and a full national discussion take place on it. But from the government's point of view, the government still sees Petrotrin as strategic and as something that it needs to maintain, as similar as the National Gas Company, for example. We see them as pivotal and strategic for the economy as a whole.
Let me bring Dr. Ramke soon in. Shagonas, let me take a call from Shagonas just before I bring Dr. Ramke soon in. Shagonas, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, good evening. My question really is, I heard the minister speaking earlier and saying that there would be a crisis with respect to foreign exchange. I went to the bank this week and was told that I had to wait 5 days for an amount of $1,000 US. Is there some sort of crisis where that is concerned? Can you shed some light, please?
She's trying to say foreign exchange was cool. Dr. Rampe, you want to...
Well, I think that question on the foreign exchange, the minister is best placed to answer.
All right, okay, I can answer it. The thing is, our foreign exchange reserves, we have over 10 billion, 10.8 billion in foreign exchange reserves. So the issue of $1,000 is not an issue if you're holding 10.8 billion. I think the issue relates to, what has the mechanisms for distribution. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that we have an economy where there are thousands of buyers,
Yes.
but only about 4 or 5 people who generate, or a relatively small number that generate foreign exchange into the system. And therefore, what comes into the system tends to be periodic and bulky,
Right.
as opposed to a normal flow coming in that matches the demand, which is also a normal flow that comes into the banks. And one of the reasons why economists such as Ronald and others have raised the issue of diversification, the reason why the government has it as a priority, is because what we want to do is have a large number of exporters and businesses in Trinidad and Tobago to generate foreign exchange, and therefore we have a much more balanced flow on both sides of the equation. As to why, for example, $1,000 may have been an issue, it's difficult for me to say. The feedback that I have from the banks, as well as from the CEO level at least, and certainly from the governor of the central bank, is that there is not any immediate issue as far as accessing foreign exchange in the system is concerned. And that, in fact, he was saying, the governor had mentioned to me some time ago that there was actually a small surplus in terms of the overall
So
cash
would that be
in the system.
policies at a lower level, like maybe at the banking level, a branch level?
Yeah,
even?
it could be things that are impacting at a branch level. It
Right.
could be, for example, if demand was for cash and the teller did not have, or the branch did not have a supply of cash at the moment, at the time when the request was made, and they were actually in the process of ordering cash, then that may have
impact
too, perhaps. But I can't say because I don't know
the details of it.
specifics
Yeah,
of these.
absolutely. Let me bring Dr. Ramkisoon in, because from my reading of the report, it seems at the heart of the matter is the fall in the oil price. Because our revenues really have dropped. They've been looking at the deficits, and now they're saying, well, the oil price has dropped, so your income is obviously affected. So I'm going to drop your rating. Am I reading it right?
Well, indeed, that might be the trigger for the downgrading that we received. But there were several other factors at work,
absolutely,
which the report would have taken into account. For one thing, we have been running deficits for several years now.
Yes.
And if you are running deficits and you are finding it difficult to generate a surplus, and in the midst of that, your major source of income falls, as it is for an individual, the same is for a country.
Right.
That is, the prospects then become much dimmer, if you like, because you are already running deficits, and you have been doing that for several years, and you did not expect to correct that until 2016, as the minister had said. And in the midst of that, you have a 40% fall in your major source of income. Add to that, the prospects over the next couple of years do not look very good.
That's what I was about to ask you.
So when you look at it in the context of that, and perhaps the major one I have not mentioned, which is what is happening to your expenditures.
Right.
So your expenditures are increasing, and we can go further into what kind of expenditures have been increasing. So when you put the Moody's report in the context of what is happening, I would not say that the report was unfair.
Right.
I can understand, and I understand very well, why Minister Hawaii will want to say that. However, I think the context, and for those who follow what has been happening, it really was not a big shock.
Right. Let me bring the minister back in there, because Moody pointed to the expenditure, as Dr. Ramkisoon pointed out, and in particular our expenditure on transfers and subsidies. I think 38 billion allocated in the last budget. Are we spending too much on transfers and subsidies, social programs, etc.? Well,
the thing with transfers and subsidies is that it does give a bit of a misimpression, a wrong impression in terms of the overall figure, because sometimes we think it's all subsidies.
Right.
In fact, transfers include transfers to the THA, transfers to the regional corporations to run the businesses within the boroughs and so on. So that a big part of it is actually represented by some of those transfers to operate the THA, for example. And that is something that is really, in a sense, a requirement in terms of the funding as any other part of central government administration is concerned. This does not mean that there isn't room for us to consider where we can reduce wastage, where we can increase efficiency in terms of not just the corporations and the statutory boards, but also in terms of the state enterprises and so on. I think there is a lot of room for us to see to what extent we might be able to reduce expenditure in those areas. I think, though, that it's also important for me to make the point while we're at it, that Standard & Poor's themselves rate the country as an A-rated country, which would be 2 notches above the rating which Moody's carry for us at the moment. And based on our own discussions with Standard & Poor's, they were of the view that they thought that the right kinds of decisions had been made in terms of keeping expenditure down, and in terms of the results of the first half of the fiscal. And they were indicating that they actually thought we would have been closer to the 3.9 billion deficit that we had projected.
Right.
And the fact that we did not show such a deficit, in fact, they thought was a good signal in terms of the overall rating of the country. So they did not have any major concerns at this point of time. I
just have a call on the line from Lanchbach. Lanchbach, welcome.
Hi, good night. Now, I understand that Ganga Singh said that we are getting this big IDB loan to do things with WASA. And so I'm sure these things affect Moody's. IDB obviously comes to countries like us and gives us these huge loans. How these things are going to affect a country like this and our ratings and our borrowing and lending?
Yeah, well, you're quite right. It's in terms of the total loans that we have outstanding is something that we need to bear in mind as we manage our overall debt configuration. But the good news with WASA is that when we came into government, WASA was 18% of the people actually got water 24/7. Today, about 70%, a little over 70% of the people in Trinidad and Tobago get water 24/7. And in fact, WASA's revenues has actually more than doubled. They were a little over 400 million a year, and they're up to close to 900 million. So that they've had a big increase in their revenues. So that the borrowing that WASA is doing, we're seeing that it commensurate with providing the services and putting the infrastructure that we need to put in place. What is happening is that there's a significant increase in their revenues, which we expect will continue, and therefore that is the source from which they will be able to repay the indebtedness. And that's what the IDB had looked at when they considered the overall facility. They were looking at the tremendous improvements that we've started to see in WASA and in the operations of WASA over the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Coming back to that whole issue of the deficit, do you see us getting into a surplus budget quickly, as Moody is suggesting?
Yeah, we had projected that by 2016 we should get to a balanced budget, and we had really projected that on the basis that we had run these deficits on the basis that we expected prices to be more or less buoyant, at least up until next year. We expected that prices would have started to come down subsequent to that, based on our own estimates of the growth in the shale oil revolution. We also recognize the fact that, of course, you can't run deficits interminably. You have at some stage to be able to be in a position to bring it under control. And the intention was to be able to do so by next year. The thing is that it's been a little bit more challenging as a result of the fall-off in revenues, which has been compounded to some extent by the fact that we have made some fiscal concessions to get upstream investments in the energy sector going. There's been very little upstream investment in the energy sector over close to 10 years, and that has affected the output of the sector. And one of the things we started to do about 4 years ago was to start putting new fiscal regime in place that will be much more competitive and which will drive the investments that we need to see offshore, because you're not going to get the oil output that you want, and you're not going to get the downstream industries that you want to see growing if you don't invest in the upstream. And that has paid off for us. When we came into government in 2010, we had 1 rig drilling offshore. That dropped to 0 shortly thereafter. But since these incentives have gone in place, we've actually now have 7 rigs drilling offshore. There's a further 8th rig that is due to come in, and we expect to be drilling a number of holes over the next, and we expect to have actually investment in that offshore sector and continuing exploration production over the next 10 years. So there is a program that has now been developed as a result. The prospectivity of the offshore, based on the seismic surveys that have been done both by BHP and BP, has been very positive over the, and therefore it suggests that, the prospectivity is there, and it's just a question of being able to get the right kind of drilling taking place. Now, the effect of that...
That will take some time to...
It will take several years. But the effect of that is that it affects our income this year, because the capital investments, for example, BP is making a $2 billion investment, and that will be an offset against profits, and therefore, based on the timeline of the investment, it will affect our revenues. And we recognize that, and we had planned for it. I mean, the fall off in oil price of commodities had been a little bit more dramatic than we would have expected. So that will affect us. So we think that going into next year, we may still have to run a small deficit as we try to recalibrate the economy, but we feel by about 2017 we should see ourselves back in a position where we think is sustainable going forward.
Yeah. Just to remind our callers, our lines are open, and the Minister has to leave us a bit early, so I'm just going to throw a couple more questions at him. And coming off of what you just said, what was the thinking behind running the deficit budgets for since 2009? Well, since you came...
yes, actually...
What were you trying to stimulate? Or?
Yeah. Basically, we had a contraction in the economy of about 4.4% in 2009, I think it was. 2010, there was a contraction. 2011, there was a smaller contraction. But we had run several years of contractions. And basically, what we sought to do was to stimulate the economy, get some of the infrastructure projects going, which we need because we have an infrastructure deficit also. And we're dealing with a number of deficits in a sense, right? But we really needed to get the economy back moving again. And therefore, the purpose of running the deficits was to do that. So we did that, and I think we did it quite successfully. The economy returned to growth, and we were moving up. And I think the IMF basically signaled when they came to do the last Article 4 consultation, which was in keeping with what we had started to see, was that the economy was hitting a full employment level, and therefore it was time to start throttling back our deficits. And that is why we ourselves had a program of reducing it to the extent that we expected. Actually, last year, the deficit was smaller than we had projected. The deficit was about 1.5% of GDP. And had we maintained that trajectory, we had expected actually that we would have been balancing the budget this year 1 year ahead of when we said we would actually have done so. Of course, prices of commodities changed, and that also affected us. And which is also one of the reasons why economists such as Ronald and others have said, look, you need to have a more balanced economy so that you don't have this situation where one event triggers a situation where there's a significant contraction. But that process of creating that diversification is something that will take a bit of time in order to get done.
What I was coming to, because I'm going to talk to Dr. Ramkissoon a lot more on the whole diversification approach, but how much of that spending really was focused on the diversification efforts? Like you pumped into what sector to say, the non-oil sector?
Well, there were the basic, the major areas of expenditure have been on infrastructure.
Right.
The road building program would have taken us well over $10 billion on its own. The hospital and health sector also was a major beneficiary of significant investments over that period of time. Capital expenditure on roads, of course, the Point Fortin Highway on its own was $7.5 billion. Of course, the Pure program was another $2.5 billion. And then, of course, you had a number of other projects which were implemented, the Valencia Bypass, the Diego Martin Highway, and so on. And so there were a number of major infrastructure projects that took place. The water investment in water also was a major investment that we undertook, where to move us from 18% 24/7 to 70% 24/7 in terms of the population at large. The school building program was also a major program. We've built 91 schools over the period of time. We've also made a major investment in tertiary education over that period of time also, in order to get and Minister Karim tells me that he has 100% of his graduates have been placed. So which is an important thing in terms of building capacity in the economy. We've also had our health sector, and one of the things we're looking at with our health sector, the Prime Minister has mentioned health tourism, but it's a little bit, I suppose, it's a little bit broader than that. Yes. It's a question of a whole transformation of our health sector and seeing our health sector as not just providing the services that are required for people of Trinidad and Tobago, but also part of a wider overhaul that we intend to do of the health sector and the attraction of further investment in that sector, as well as patients and so on coming in from overseas into the health sector. And that is another area that we see as part of the diversification of the economy. So on the one hand, while we will be building infrastructure and capacity to service our population, is also a magnet for further investment and for revenue generation outside of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of patients coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And that's why we have, we built the Burns unit, we're putting up the oncology center. There's a cardiac center which is in process, which is a public-private partnership. In fact, it's more private than public, in that they will be, the investors, the cash investment will come from the international investors, but we are putting up some land via the University of the West Indies, and we're looking for a tie-up between the University of the West Indies and the University of North Carolina as far as building some capacity locally is concerned. So there are a number of areas in which the investments took place, which were mainly focused on building capacity locally within the local economy. We also have set aside a separate fund of about $1 billion, which is to be used for public-private partnerships in the area of tourism, for example, and that's another area that we focused on. And we are now also looking at a major investment with the IFC in order to create a new strategic sector in the area of dispute resolution, and Trinidad and Tobago as a dispute resolution center, and to help develop the capital markets. And to really, so right now, New York and London are seen as major dispute resolution centers, and we think there's an opening where we may be able to take a tear down from what they do in terms of dealing with capital markets and dispute resolution in the financial services sector. So there are a number of areas that we've started to put some investments in, and in which the bulk of the funding over the past few years have gone.
Excellent. Feel free to let me know when you need to slip out. But just to bring Dr.
About now.
About now. All right, let's take a break. Allow the minister to leave, and we'll be right back and continue the discussion with Dr. Ramke soon. Welcome back. We're having a very interesting discussion. The Minister of Finance was with us, and he was making the case that no need to panic, essentially. Our economy is still strong. Still with us is Dr. Ronald Ramke. But just before we continue the discussion, we wanted to hear from you. So our cameras took to the streets, I believe, in Chaguanas, and we got some views from just ordinary citizens on what they thought about Moody's downgrade. Let's hear from you.
I think it's very disappointing. Very, very disappointing. Too many questions and no answer, no proper answer we're getting from him. No, well, if Moody, who's supposed to be the body that police the world economy, and they are saying that we're in problem, and my government is telling me that they are not, they are lying, well then we're in a really bad state. Really, really, really terrible state. Because they're supposed to be taking advice from Moody, not condemning Moody at this point in time, where our future is concerned.
I believe the Moody report is right because we are living in the country and we're seeing what is going on. And if the government will come out and tell us the truth about what Moody say and everything that they say is true, then we would have a much better country to live in. No, I don't think our future is secure.
Is the country in a financially secure position right now?
No.
Why would you say that?
Because how I used to get sale long time, sale is different now, more slow. And if you get a downgrade, it can't be moving up. You gotta get an upgrade.
He come from a experienced background where he come from the bank and the position he's stable back everything from how it was from before. We just have to be confident in him for now because he bring it back and more or less the government itself just clearing off all the bills that we was in from before. So it's more or less just stabilization now, and maybe when the future comes, we go see how it goes forward.
Yes, I do, because of his, past life and his knowledge, his excellent background in finance, and he worked in the bank before, he was manager or whatnot. So yeah, I think he's a good minister. I don't really agree with them because, to my knowledge, we still have jobs in the economy, we still have people working, there's money being flowed in the economy, so I don't really agree with them.
I think the country going down, going up. Going down.
So you're not confident in the financial future of our country? You can't share why? Why do you think that way?
Well, they kind of lavish spending, right? And then there's the money that going out and nobody could give account about it. That's my opinion.
Well, some views of people in Shogunas there. Dr. Kisun, I want to take up on one of the people interviewed there, and they said we should be taking advice from Moody. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think we should listen to what they have to say. Mm-hmm. I think, though, that there's no need for overreaction in respect of being overly pessimistic or being overly optimistic. I think we got to be realistic.
Right.
The nature of the economy, what are the challenges before us. This is an international body that has usually been right. Mm-hmm. Like other international bodies, we listen to what they have to say, we take it on board, and we move on.
Right.
I don't know that we will deny that we have certain challenges. In fact, the minister himself admitted that we have certain challenges of this economy that we have not been dealing with and that we have not dealt with over the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing earth-shattering about that. Mm-hmm. There are certain things we are still not doing right and still have not gotten right. Mm-hmm. And that's a fact, that's a reality. Mm-hmm. And the quicker we realize that we needed to begin to do some things right and put our house in order, the better it's going to be for us going forward.
And putting the house in order, are you referring to diversification essentially? Because are we too reliant, we've been saying it for years, on oil and gas, and is the drop in the oil price sort of a wake-up call once again to say, you know what, we need to other sectors to come on board and take us forward?
Certainly, we want to use, if you like, the bad news as an indication as to how serious we must get in respect of the diversifying of this economy. Mm-hmm. And yes, there has been a lot of talk, a lot of conversation about diversifying this economy. And I think that some activity is taking place. Is it sufficient? The answer is no. Have we seen any change in the figures? I don't think the answer will be positive. I think we have to, in any case, view it as the long haul.
Right.
And really a change in the diversification of the economy is not going to happen in 5 years.
Right.
In fact, it is not going to happen in 10. But I think what we would like to see, economists, policymakers, is in fact some start to that transformation. And again, we need to repeat that it is not to say that we must get out of or ignore the fact that we have oil and gas.
Right.
And I think the initiatives that are currently on board are in fact positive. The unfortunate thing, if you like, is that it takes 7-8 years or more before we begin to see the oil and gas coming to the ground. And again, we remember the kind of economy, so that you may have an increase in quantity, but where will the price be? And that is the nature of an open petroleum economy. And that is the major reason why we need to look at our existing comparative advantages, whether they be in the creative arts, whether they be in tourism, wherever they are, and seek to promote them on a sustainable basis. I think another important dimension is that the population needs to appreciate the nature of a petroleum economy, of a gas economy. The fact that there will be times when prices will be high and times that prices will be low. But if our politicians continue, and I stress continue, to build a dependent society by the kinds of policies which are fostered in the interest of winning elections, for example, if the behaviors continue along those lines from administration to administration, then that is not going to encourage the population to understand the nature of the economy, what are economic rents, what are windfalls, why we cannot depend on those. And if we are able to begin to understand that, and that we need to use and look at our other comparative advantages and develop those, I think is a conversation that is long overdue.
But how do you, talking fiscal measures here, how do you balance the budget? And in our case, can you cut back on some of the transfers, subsidies, social programs, and balance really the fallout, the social fallout from it?
Well, you want to start with, first, let me say, social support for those who are at the bottom rung of the ladder, as it were, the poor, the indigent. Social support is important, must be continued, and must be a part of all economies.
Absolutely.
It is, and it will continue to be so. But there are critical lessons for economies like ours. One, the recognition that when you ramp up those expenditures and those support to groups in the society, when you have to adjust them, bring them back down, it is not easy because you have encouraged people to, and you have built that expectation. And when you go, if you have to go to cut back on that, then you would have a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth, as it were. And you just move from cycle to cycle. So that is one good reason why you want to be careful that those that levels of social support is sustainable. The second issue has to do with value for money. We have seen around us a lot to suggest that there's a lot of leakages taking place across the board.
Right.
And therefore, while we have now started some attempt, I see the Ministry of Planning in respect of a monitoring and a report of what has been happening. I don't know that it is comprehensive enough, and I don't know that it has begun to sink into the psyche of the population that there is something called value for money.
Yes.
And we cannot be spending large amounts of tax revenues, and when we look at the services, whether they be in health, in national security, in housing, wherever, the returns don't match the kinds of expenditures. And it does not seem as if we are very concerned with that.
Yeah,
what we are more concerned with, successive administrations, is in fact the fact that expenditures are going up. We are spending so much on social services,
right.
and as if that in itself is something positive.
I think we may have do we have a caller on the line? Caller, welcome.
Yeah.
Caller from Londonville.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
What I want to say to you is, I think the Prime Minister is on the right track. Because you see, all the development that she is doing will be very good to...
Caller, can you lower the
encourage
volume on your
diversification
set, please?
Yeah?
Can you lower the volume on your television set before you continue?
Yeah, diversification of the economy would be much better with all the development that she is doing. You see? So I think she is on the right track. You know? You see the roads that she built, the highways that she built. You know, if you have foreign investors coming into the country, it would be much easier for them to locate themselves. You know? So I think she is on the right track.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll respond to the caller, Dr. Ramkis. Welcome back. We're having a very interesting discussion about the economy and Moody's downgrade, in particular with Dr. Ronald Ramkis, senior economist. I wanted to, we have a few minutes to before we wrap it up, but I wanted to ask you this question. Is it true to say that oil still comprises a relatively small share of our energy exports, and therefore, despite its volatility, if the prices of other petrochemicals, ammonia, LNG, etc., kind of remain stable, we are not too much in dire states, put it that way?
Well, I mean, several points. Oil is still very important. Crude oil exports, the return per barrel to us in revenue for a barrel of oil is much higher than a barrel of gas equivalent.
Right.
Notwithstanding that, we produce more gas than crude oil. The point is that they are all important.
Right.
The petrochemicals, they are all important. Unfortunately, there tends to be a correlation between all their prices.
Right.
And in other words, what that means is if one price goes down, then there's a tendency, as we have seen.
We have a caller. Let me just take this caller from, is it Shogonas? Shogonas, welcome.
Yes. Hi, good evening, gentlemen. I just wanted to ask Dr. Ramkis a question. Would he agree with me if I said that the dependency syndrome and the social spending has begun decades ago, right? And over decades, that dependency and that expectation for freeness and dependence on the state seeps into the psyche of the individuals. And if it took 40 years to get us to this point, how long does he think it would take us to change the psyche of the society to become less dependent and less expectations from the state and be more self-sufficient?
Well, let me say, I'm not a psychologist. However, I would say at least 40 years. But it certainly will take some time. It is not going to happen overnight. But I think parts of the population would like to see that there is a start and that there is an explanation to the man in the street, as well as to everybody else in the society, that it cannot be business as usual in a petroleum economy, a gas economy. Prices move in a particular way, and we must be aware and alert to that, which is why we develop other sectors as best we can. I want to make a point about the infrastructure. And infrastructural development is important and has to be done and is critical for the economic development of any country. I should say the social and economic development of any country. So it is important that indeed one can argue that we have not spent enough over the last period on capital expenditure. Indeed, we should have been spending more on capital expenditure and less on recurrent expenditure, which includes subsidies and transfers. I want to say as well, however, that infrastructure development means that you must plan for the maintenance of that infrastructure, whether it be roads, whatever, schools, because we have a habit in Trinidad and Tobago of putting the money in building the infrastructure, but not outfitting it properly or not maintaining it, so that within a short space of time, we find there's deterioration and poor quality, etc.
Let me ask you then, what can we do in the short term, looking forward, what can we do in the short term to help restore our credit rating?
Well, I think in the report itself, they pointed to certain things that if we do them, one of them is to bring the budget in closer balance, not necessarily getting rid of the deficit. We need to also address the revenue side. And that is something that we have not paid enough attention to, the revenue side of the budget. We have not taken the measures to have a more efficient tax administration initiative. And in other words, we're saying to the world, we're more concerned, we seem to be saying, with increasing expenditures and less concern with the revenue side. And that clearly is bad macroeconomic management.
So whoever's the new finance minister, or it's the same finance minister come this election year, he has a whole lot on his shoulders.
I would say so. Absolutely. I would say so, Joel. Yeah.
We have to wrap up the program. Thanks a lot, Dr. Ramkissoon. A very interesting discussion. Thanks to all our callers for heating up the set as usual on this Tough Talking Thursday. Have a good night.